I'm Liz Niesloss. Tonight on Greater Boston, what you need to know about the New Hampshire primary before the ballots are counted on Tuesday. Then, the state's housing secretary, Ed Augustus, joins me to make his pitch for the Healey administration's $4 billion affordable homes plan. Plus, a court-ordered parenting course that does more harm than good. From GOP frontrunner Donald Trump, whose eligibility to even run for president is going before the Supreme Court, to Democratic incumbent Joe Biden, who kept himself off the state's ballot over an intra-party political dispute. There's nothing ordinary about this year's New Hampshire primary. So how are things shaping up ahead of Tuesday? GBH News political anchor and reporter Adam Riley joins me now. So, where there's Trump, there's drama. What's ahead in New Hampshire?
Although I just wrapped up working on a piece, sort of a curtain raiser on this particular primary, and what struck me is the people I talked with, all of whom spend a lot of time watching the New Hampshire primary, getting excited about the New Hampshire primary, interpreting the New Hampshire primary for other people, they were struggling to get excited about this. Dante Scala, a political scientist at the University of New Hampshire, told me that he thought it was one of the most boring cycles he's seen, and he's been, I think, in New Hampshire since 2000. Chris Galdieri, a political scientist at St. Anselm, told me that everyone's just really bored right now. So there is actually, I think, a case to be made that there's less drama than you might think, given how high the stakes ultimately are, given that we're talking about who's going to be the next president of the United States.
So is that a problem that is really a problem for the analysts and the reporters, or is that a real problem?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think it's a problem if you are someone who wants to attach great meaning to the New Hampshire primary. So if you're a Democratic or Republican activist in New Hampshire who wants candidates to keep coming, who wants people to be excited about what the results are, if you want to see the primary shape the national narrative, it's possible that will happen. But one thing I want to highlight right at the outset is that this is, as the people I mentioned and others said to me, this is essentially a primary where you've got two incumbents running. The most exciting primaries are the opposite, right, where you don't have a standard bearer on either side, and you have no idea who's going to come out on top, who's going to end up being the nominee. Here we have Biden, who we're pretty sure is going to be the Democratic nominee, and Trump, who has looked like the inevitable Republican nominee for years at this point. It's possible that Nikki Haley is going to have a better than expected showing that changes the narrative about Trump. But right now, it is still like we have two incumbents running against each other, which is unprecedented.
So obviously, Nikki Haley does not want this to be a foregone conclusion. And maybe that feeds into a sense of there's nothing I can do, maybe a little more apathy for Haley.
Well, there is reason to think that she has a good shot at surprising people, in which case everything I just said about the primary being boring would go out the window. There was a poll that came out yesterday, I think it was an American research poll, if I remember correctly, that showed Haley and Trump tied 40% to 40% among likely primary voters. If somehow Haley managed to eke out a 1 or a 2-point win over Donald Trump, or even if she basically split the vote with him, we like to talk about things, right? We like to attach meaning to political developments, especially if they happen close to us. And with a result like that, I think we'd see new oxygen given to the idea that maybe the Republican Party isn't quite ready to go with Donald Trump yet again. Now, that new narrative, if Haley manages to create it, could be dispelled in a matter of weeks, but it would be given life by that outcome. If she loses by like 15 points, 20 points, maybe even 10 points, I think it'll be harder for that narrative to build momentum.
Right. But explain to us, the rules in New Hampshire are slightly different. So there's opening for independents there. Explain how that works.
Well, independents can vote in either the Democratic or the Republican primary. They have to pick one. There's reason to think that a lot of independents are taking interest in the Republican primary, which could help Haley. That is the argument that Donald Trump has actually been making. I think he's been making it in campaign mailers, making it at rallies, that you've got people on the left, as he describes it, trying to infiltrate the Republican primary.
He has been saying that, trying to suggest that Haley's involved in something nefarious, drawing in Democrats, drawing in independents.
He has indeed. Now, one other thing we should make sure to mention, and feel free, give me a not so subtle signal when I got to shut up. We should mention that Joe Biden isn't even showing up to participate in this primary. His name's not on the ballot, as you mentioned. He's not campaigning in the state, and that's because This primary, the way it's played out, is this weird product of a dispute between New Hampshire on the one hand and the Democratic Party on the other. Biden and other national Democrats wanted to demote New Hampshire. They wanted South Carolina to go first. They wanted New Hampshire and Nevada to go about a week later. The argument for that was that South Carolina has way more black voters than New Hampshire. New Hampshire is lily white. It's not representative of the country. It's not representative of the Democratic base. New Hampshire has it codified in state law, we should remind people, that they have to go first. They have to go before anyone else. So the DNC is sanctioning New Hampshire for going first. They won't be seating any delegates based on the results here. But New Hampshire wants to be first. It's really important to the state that they go before everyone else.
So it seems, Biden is doing so poorly in polls. He's carrying a lot of baggage. Is this a mistake standing on ceremony for this point, like an unforced error?
It could end up being an unforced error. You can imagine a scenario if Biden gets, in the 40s or something, and one of the long-shot Democratic challengers, Marianne Williamson or Dean Phillips, has an unexpectedly strong showing, then that'll feed into angst, hand-wringing about Biden, whether he's up to the task again, what his prospects are. But there's a pretty robust effort to get people to write in Biden underway right now. There's people from Massachusetts, including Governor Maura Healey, who are participating in that. If Biden manages to get, 60% of the vote via write-ins, then he'll be able to flip that on its head and say, look, there's actually substantial support from me, or his surrogates will be able to say there's substantial support for him in New Hampshire, even though he didn't even deign to put his name on the ballot.
So there are no delegates at stake here for the Democrats.
No delegates for
right?
the Democrats are going to be awarded based on
So ultimately, what does New Hampshire mean for Biden?
It's all about perception, right? And he'll have a field day. I mentioned him getting 60% of the vote. If he gets 55% of the vote and Donald Trump is under 50, neck and neck with Nikki Haley, he'll probably find a way to talk about that on the campaign trail, even though he hasn't wanted to participate in the contest. It's all about perception and how the two candidates leverage the results, whatever they are, to make themselves look good.
Adam Riley, you said it's boring, but I think you make it very interesting, very compelling case there for drama in New Hampshire. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Liz.
Next, if you live in Massachusetts, I don't need to tell you that the cost of housing is a huge problem facing the state. In her first State of the Commonwealth address, Governor Maura Healey described the stakes.
It starts with housing, the biggest challenge we face.
She urged lawmakers to take action on her administration's proposed $4 billion Affordable Homes Act. And a few hours ago, Healey's Secretary of Housing and Livable Communities, Ed Augustus, went before lawmakers to make the case for the bill. He joins me now. Welcome, Secretary Augustus.
Thank you.
So what took so long to get to something so ambitious? As Healey said in her speech, this is a decades in the making problem, and there is no one who doesn't recognize the problem in the state.
Well, I think that's right. I think there's a number of factors that have combined to create the housing crisis that we're facing, and that manifests itself at so many different levels. If you talk to business leaders, they'll tell you about the challenges in terms of retaining and recruiting talent. When they're competing for some talented person to work for their company or business, and yet they have to pay close to 50% of their income on housing. They're looking at other places that only 30% maybe has to go to housing.
So that's the problem, that's the outcome. But what's taken so long to pull everyone together to say we got to grab hold of this?
I think a few things. I think historically we've seen local communities often throw up barriers to housing production that have made it either impossible or very time-consuming and costly to pursue all of the appeals and regulatory processes at the local level. The MBTA Communities Law is really designed to help remove some of those barriers at the local level. So we're very much engaged with the implementation of that law. And quite honestly, we just have not been incenting the industry to do enough of the construction necessary to kind of keep up with demand.
And construction is extremely expensive in this state.
Exactly. So right now we have interest rates that are historically high, which makes the cost of financing projects challenging. And we know a number of projects that are otherwise permitted and supported and designed are now on the sidelines because they don't work in this interest rate environment. That combined with the inflationary pressures, particularly on construction construction materials have been kind of a perfect storm to really slow housing production. And that's the challenge we see, right? It's a supply-demand issue. If you're a renter or you're a first-time home buyer, you have very little power in this market.
So what's ambitious in this plan?
I think the ambition really is in the $4 billion price tag. That's on the authorization of many of the programs that we use to support housing production, things like the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, things like preserving our existing state-owned public housing infrastructure. Massachusetts is the only state in the country that has 43,000 units of state-owned public housing, but a lot of it has not been invested in ways to make sure that it's healthy and safe and online. And so we're trying to make up for that in this bill and tripling the amount of capital improvements to our public housing stock. And then there are 28 policy proposals, which combined with the authorizations for spending and the tax credits that were in the tax bill that the governor signed over the summer and implementation of the MBTA Communities Act, those 4 different elements combined, we really believe are going to jumpstart housing production.
So how is zoning being addressed? It's been cited as a big obstacle. Municipalities have their own zoning patchworks, and they don't want this, and how is that being addressed here?
A couple different ways. One is the MBTA Communities Law. There's 177 communities, so nearly half the cities and towns in Massachusetts that have significant amounts of public transportation within their community, or they're adjacent to communities that have public transportation access, have requirements to create as-of-right zoning for multifamily, more dense housing in the areas around those transit nodes, with the idea that this was really smart growth. This is taking advantage of the state investments in public transportation. It helps advance our climate goals by allowing people options to use public transportation to get to work or school. And it removes those local barriers that we know historically have existed. In the bill that the governor has filed, there's a number of other tools there, things like accessory dwelling units, or often referred to as in-law apartments, removing the local barriers that are in place and creating an as-of-right opportunity for homeowners to build those units anywhere in Massachusetts.
So the idea is to take some of that hyper-local control and opposition that has been the roadblock to help the state go forward?
Exactly. We can't put this all on a handful of communities. Some communities have been very progressive and aggressive about building housing, and yet other communities haven't. And this is a problem that affects every community in Massachusetts. Every community has municipal workers, school teachers and firefighters, bus drivers, retail workers who need affordable places to live close to where they work.
Now, there are a lot of estimates out there about how much housing the state really needs. What estimate do you go with?
We're working with an estimate of about 200,000 units of new housing that needs to be produced over the next 10 years if we're going to meet the demand, if we're not going to force people to choose other states than Massachusetts to build their careers. And we talk about it as life cycle housing. So folks, maybe when they're getting out of college and there are a few roommates, the kind of housing they're looking for is different than when they're starting their family and they need extra bedrooms, or when they're empty nesters or want to age in place. We need to make sure we have housing that meets all of those needs for each of those kind of stages of life, so you can do all that right here in Massachusetts.
Now, so this seems like something that surely has to be done, and right now we have, the government trifecta. You have Democratic control of the governor's office in both houses. So what's the likelihood that this can move quickly? I think I was hearing several hints from the governor that the legislature has to pick up their pace. Let's listen to a bit of her sound.
We're dealing with a housing shortage that's decades in the making. To get costs down, we have to go big, and we have to go big now.
So is the administration turning up the heat on this legislature, which has been labeled as slow? 2023 was a really ineffective year, apparently, for the legislature. Will you turn up the heat to get this done?
I think we're looking to work in partnership with the legislature. We've suggested a very ambitious set of proposals that's received very widespread support from the business community, from housing advocates, from municipal leaders. It really is a unique coalition of folks who've come forward to support this bill, and I think the legislature gets the need to act and act quickly.
Okay, Ed Augustus, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Before we move on, Healey's first State of the Commonwealth address featured a lot of heavy topics, but it wasn't all serious moments.
To the cabinet and executive staff, we should take a selfie for this one. We do things a little differently. Yeah, no, with the gang.
With the gang, this way.
With the gang, yeah.
Get ready, small.
Forgive us, we're rookies.
Now we turn to a serious issue. Escaping domestic abuse is terrifying and traumatic enough. When kids are involved, it's even worse. Now imagine getting through all of that and then having to take court-ordered parenting classes with your estranged, abusive spouse. As GBH News Deputy Investigative Editor Jennifer McKim explains in a new report, that's been the reality for some parents in Massachusetts who ended up among the hundreds of divorced and estranged couples who've taken the controversial and costly high-conflict parent education course in the past decade. Jennifer joins me now, along with Jamie Sabino, Deputy Director of Advocacy for the Massachusetts Law Reform Institute. So, Jennifer, this is a very powerful story. Tell me, what is this program all about? What's the purpose of this course?
Thank you so much for having us. Basically, this is a course that is required by some judges in the court for parents who are supposedly high conflict, meaning they spend a lot of time in the court, and basically they're saying, because of what you're doing, you are harming your children. So we are going to require you to take a class so you can get along better, and that would be better for the children. It would limit toxic stress, etc. That is purportedly the reason behind this class.
Jamie, what's an example of what they're teaching?
The idea of this is that there's just this high conflict. If you get along, everything will be fine. So you have to support your other parent. You have to put a picture in your kid's bedroom of their other parent. You make food and bring it over. For parents,
To the potentially, you bring food to your abuser.
Right, and so for parents who are trying to figure out how to live on their own without their abuser controlling them, how to parent on their own, suddenly to be bringing food is traumatizing.
So we have a quote here from a woman who wrote to GBH News about her experience. She says, "I was instructed to write down the ways that I trigger my abuser's anger and what I can do different in the future so my children would enjoy better academic and emotional outcomes. I was tempted to write down breathing." It's pretty startling. Seems like a very, perhaps, good motivation to make things smoother for the children. But in this case, it seems like such a glaring error.
So several of these women reached out to me, and it's not a beat I cover a lot, but I heard about it, and what was stunning and startling is that these judges are requiring parents, sometimes when there are active restraining orders and not some past domestic abuse, but active restraining orders, still required to be in a physical class or remote during the pandemic, and sometimes even being put in breakout rooms without any type of supervision. And so that these women were really, really startled and frustrated and scared and reached out and said, someone needs to know what's going on.
So, JB, this seems to contradict common sense, perhaps a collective body of wisdom. How does this become a course that's ordered by a judge?
So there are some judges who seem to have difficulty separating out what might be a high conflict divorce. It's not even clear that that's an identifiable category from cases where there's been domestic abuse. There's a great deal of study that many judges don't believe women in court. Many judges believe the domestic abuse claims are being done to get a leg up in the divorce, and it's really not that bad, particularly people who've been together for a long time. Well, if it was that bad, why didn't you leave 10 years ago? and have not a lot of understanding of coercion and control and those issues. I would also add this is really shaming for many women because they're being told, you should be co-parenting and you should be doing this, and I can't do this with my abuser. I can parallel parent, I can do other things, but I'm ashamed because I'm not doing the right parenting here.
So, Jen, explain, how did this get attention? We know that Boston College Law Lab wrote a white paper, a policy paper on the issue, but how did this all come about?
So these women who were being forced into this class started to talk to each other and started to say, I'm feeling terrible, you're feeling terrible, we need to do something. They started reaching out to lawyers all over the state, and they found this Boston College legal lab that agreed to take a look at it. And basically they worked on this report. Claire Donahue is a professor there, spent I think about several months, if not a year, working on this project with students, another researcher, and basically they came out with findings substantiating some of these women's concerns. And another part of the problem, which they bring out about in the white paper, is that it's confusing that these women are being required to take this class with their separate divorcing parents when there was a statewide mandatory class that the Probate and Family Court suspended over 2 years ago because they were concerned that there was not enough oversight, and they were concerned that there was not proven benefits of the class. So these women are like, but wait, why are we being required to take a class when the state has suspended the other one?
And it's a very expensive class. It's kind of startling, $900, which would be per parent, a struggle for a low-income parent, no waiver.
And there's no waiver because it's not a court run, supervised. For the court-mandated parenting groups, which have come back or coming back online, they're like $50, and if you have an affidavit of indigency that you're poor, you get that waived. Not for these.
So, and there would be the sense that I better do this or I might lose custody? Is that the sense?
Absolutely. I'm already being targeted as a bad parent. And if I don't do this, well, I am not collaborative. I am not willing to be a co-parent. That makes me a bad parent. And that makes me trying to separate my children from their father. So that there's a huge amount of pressure to do this.
Some of the judges even said, you know, don't come back till you finish the class. And what the white paper found through the stories of women, that it can take months and months to get signed up for the course, take the course, and in the meanwhile they're just waiting and wondering and afraid. So there's a lot of reasons why there were concerns.
And if going through this course, an actual incident of domestic violence occurs, that victim is not going to go restraining order because, oh, the judge is going to think I'm trying to derail this course. So it actually puts people in danger.
Wow. So there was a course, you mentioned another parenting course, which was suspended by the state. Jamie, tell us why.
So they suspended it because they found there were a number of different vendors, and so people were having different experiences.
This was a class not in high conflict cases?
No, just for everybody who was going through a divorce, certain paternity cases. And it was, divorce is stressful, and you're going to need to, you know, be parenting together. But it was very unevenly done, and there was a lot of the shaming that people felt. So Chief Justice John Casey of the Probate and Family Court said, we can't do that. They stopped that. They spent a couple of years looking for another vendor. They picked a vendor. You know, no program is perfect, but one that they felt legal service lawyers still had some concerns about it, particularly getting a waiver if you're in domestic violence. The Probate and Family Court has been very responsive. They have met every one of our demands of how you outline this. It's a $50 course. It's 4 or 8 hours. You do it online without the other person there.
So how does this other course escape this kind of scrutiny? It seems.
So basically these women wrote a letter to the Chief Justice to complain about it, and they sent me back the response that basically said, we understand there are concerns, we are going to look into it, but this is not overseen by the court, it's not regulated by the court, and that judges have the prerogative to ask parents to do things in court that they can't stop them from doing.
Most of the things they ask parents to do are in areas that have some regulation. They can ask, or almost require, you don't get parenting time, parent who's been abusive, until you take a certified batterers intervention program. But those programs are certified by the Department of Public Health. They have a curriculum that's understandable.
So there's scrutiny normally when there's, so tell me, is this a typical thing that states do, this educational component to rectify something in a household?
Well, the mandated program that everybody takes, about 17 states have it. There's questions about how valuable it is. But as long as it is low impact, so to speak, not expensive, not a huge amount of time, and you can get waivers, and the court is making it clear that if you have a language issue or domestic violence or other things, I believe other states do engage in judges sending people to these supposedly high conflict thing. And cases with domestic violence are often misunderstood as high conflict. Whoa, there were 200 filings in this case. Maybe they don't get along. Well, that's because of the abuse. Yeah. Abusive litigation, using the courts to control people, that's a real problem. And yet they get misidentified.
Jen, at this point, this is a white paper, all this information that came out of Boston College's paper, policy paper. What happens to that?
So Claire Donahue, who is the lead author of it, said basically she wrote it hoping that people would discuss it, that she was going to send it to the court and she was going to send it to William James College, and hoping that it will prompt discussion about the use and benefit of these courses. She herself said it had big questions. She said it's like going to the class of like good parenting, and that she had her own issues. And so hopefully it will prompt more debate.
All right, well, we will continue to watch it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight, but come back tomorrow for Talking Politics. Adam Riley will dig even deeper into all things New Hampshire primary with Boston Public Radio's Jim Braude and Marjorie Egan, who've been covering the races for Manchester. Plus, UNH Survey Center Director Andrew Smith on the candidates with the most to gain and lose on Tuesday. That and more tomorrow at 7. Thanks for watching. I'm Liz Neesloss. Good night.
Laura Simmons